She gave him her heart, her trust, and access to everything. But the man she thought she knew was a ghost, a carefully constructed lie. And when the bank called that Tuesday morning, Sarah's entire world collapsed in ways she never imagined possible. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow across the ballroom, their light dancing off champagne glasses and elegant evening gowns. Sarah Mitchell stood near the silent auction table, pretending to examine a painting she couldn't afford, feeling out of place among Chicago's elite donors. She'd only come because her hospital required one staff member from each department to attend this charity fundraiser. The music was too loud, the conversations too polished, and she was counting down the minutes until she could slip out unnoticed. Then she saw him. A man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, standing alone by the bar, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wasn't looking around the room like everyone else. His eyes were fixed solely on her, as if she were the only person who existed in that crowded space. When their eyes met, he smiled. Not the practiced, networking smile she'd seen all night, but something warmer, more genuine. He began walking toward her, weaving through the crowd with confident, unhurried steps. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as he got closer. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his voice deep and smooth as expensive whiskey. "I'm Daniel, and I promise I'm not here to bore you with small talk about stock portfolios." Sarah laughed despite her nervousness, and in that moment, she had no idea she'd just met the man who would destroy everything she'd ever built. What made Daniel choose Sarah out of everyone in that room? Their first conversation lasted 2 hours, flowing as easily as if they'd known each other for years. Daniel asked questions that no one had ever asked before, not just, "What do you do?" but "What made you want to become a pediatric nurse?" And "What's the most meaningful moment you've had at work?" He leaned in when she spoke, his dark brown eyes never leaving her face, making her feel like every word she said mattered deeply. When she mentioned her exhausting 12-hour shifts, he didn't change the subject like most people did. Instead, he said, "That takes incredible strength. Most people couldn't handle what you do." Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest, a loneliness she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Here was someone who actually saw her, who recognized the weight she carried every day. As the night wore on, the ballroom emptied, but neither of them noticed. The catering staff began clearing tables around them, casting polite glances that said it was time to leave. But Daniel simply handed them generous tips and asked for a few more minutes. "I don't want this to end," he admitted, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. "I know we just met, but I feel like I've been looking for you my entire life." The words should have sounded like a cheesy pickup line, but coming from him, they felt like truth. When he asked for her number, Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she typed it into his phone. She watched him save it under Sarah, the one, and he showed her the screen with a playful grin. "Too much?" he asked. "Just right," she whispered, though something deep in her gut flickered for just a second, a warning she immediately dismissed as paranoid. Anxiety. Was Daniel's interest genuine? Or was Sarah already caught in a carefully laid trap? The next morning, Sarah woke to find 36 red roses waiting outside her apartment door with a handwritten note. "Last night reminded me that magic still exists. Dinner tonight? D." Her hand shook as she brought them inside, their sweet fragrance filling her small living room. No one had ever done something like this for her before. Her phone buzzed with a text. "I hope that wasn't too forward. I just couldn't stop thinking about you." Sarah stared at the message, her heart doing somersaults in her chest. She'd been on plenty of dates before, awkward coffee meets, forgettable dinners with men who spent the entire time talking about themselves, but this felt different. Daniel felt different. That dinner led to another, then weekend getaways to Wisconsin lake houses, and surprise picnics in Millennium Park. He remembered everything. How she took her coffee, 2 sugars. Light cream, that she was allergic to shellfish. That her favorite color was sage green because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden. 3 months in, he surprised her at the hospital with lunch from her favorite Thai restaurant, showing up during her break with that devastating smile. Her coworkers whispered and giggled, watching through the break room window as this handsome, attentive man fed her pad Thai and made her laugh until tears streamed down her face. "You're so lucky," her colleague Monica said later, her voice tinged with envy. "He's like something out of a romance novel." Sarah beamed with pride, floating through the rest of her shift on clouds of happiness. But as she walked to her car that evening, she passed a homeless man holding a cardboard sign that read, "Too good to be true usually is." She dropped a $5 bill in his cup and hurried past, pushing the uncomfortable thought away. Why did happiness always have to come with doubt? Why couldn't she just enjoy this perfect man who'd appeared in her life like an answered prayer? What was Daniel really thinking as he watched Sarah fall deeper in love with him? 6 months after that first meeting, Daniel stood in Sarah's apartment doorway with 2 expensive leather suitcases and a garment bag containing his collection of designer suits. The November rain pounded against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere as Sarah helped him bring his belongings inside. She noticed immediately how little he had: no boxes of books, no framed photos of family, no random accumulation of stuff that most people carried through life like barnacles on a ship. "Is this everything?" she asked, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice as she watched him hang up his 5th identical navy suit. Daniel laughed, that warm, disarming sound that always made her defenses crumble. "I told you consulting keeps me on the road constantly. I've learned to live minimally. Everything I need fits in 2 bags. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Besides, I'm not attached to things. I'm attached to people." "To you?" Sarah melted into his embrace, breathing in his expensive cologne, something woodsy and sophisticated that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Her small 2-bedroom apartment suddenly felt full in ways it never had before, even though he'd barely brought anything. That night, they ordered Chinese takeout and ate it sitting on her worn couch, his arm draped around her shoulders as they watched old movies. Daniel's phone buzzed repeatedly during dinner emails, he explained, urgent messages from clients in different time zones. "The life of an investment consultant never stops," he said with an apologetic smile, but he silenced the phone and gave her his full attention. Everything felt perfect, domestic, real. But later, after he'd fallen asleep, Sarah lay awake staring at those 2 suitcases in the corner of her bedroom. And a strange thought crept through her mind like a shadow. Who lives their entire life out of 2 bags? What was Daniel hiding in the life he claimed to live on the road? 3 weeks after moving in, Daniel brought up the idea over breakfast on a lazy Sunday morning. Sarah was making pancakes, still in her pajamas, her hair piled messily on top of her head. Daniel sat at her small kitchen table with his laptop open, supposedly reviewing market reports, but she could feel his eyes on her. "I've been thinking," he said, closing the laptop and giving her his full attention. "We should open a joint bank account for the wedding fund." Sarah paused mid-flip, the spatula hovering over the pan. They'd been engaged for 2 months, but they hadn't discussed finances yet. "A joint account?" she repeated, trying to process the suggestion. Daniel stood and came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "We're building a life together, Sarah, partners in everything. I want us to save for our future, the wedding, the honeymoon, eventually a house. It makes sense to have our money in one place." His voice was so reasonable, so full of love and future plans. Sarah turned off the stove and faced him, studying his face. Those warm brown eyes looked back at her with such openness, such trust. "What's mine is yours," he continued, taking her hands in his. "And what's yours is mine. That's what marriage is about, right? No secrets, complete transparency." The words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, dispelling her hesitation. This was what she'd always wanted: a true partnership, someone to build a life with. "Okay," she agreed, squeezing his hands. "Let's do it." The next day, they went to the bank together. Sarah transferred $15,000 from her personal savings account, 5 years of careful budgeting, skipped vacations and extra shifts at the hospital. As she watched the teller process the transaction, a cold feeling settled in her stomach, like she'd just stepped off a cliff. But Daniel kissed her temple and whispered, "This is just the beginning of our adventure," and the feeling passed. The bank officer handed them both debit cards with their names embossed in silver. Sarah tucked hers into her wallet, not knowing she just handed a predator the keys to her entire financial life. Why did Daniel need access to Sarah's money if he was such a successful consultant? The business trips started 2 weeks after they opened the joint account. Daniel would kiss Sarah goodbye on Monday mornings, his leather briefcase in hand, his suit freshly pressed, and disappear for 3 or 4 days at a time. "Boston this week," he'd say, or "San Francisco big client presentation," or Miami closing a major deal. He always called every evening at exactly 9 p.m., his voice warm and steady over the phone, asking about her day, telling her he missed her, describing the boring hotel room he was stuck in. Sometimes Sarah could hear city sounds in the background: car horns, sirens, the distant buzz of urban life, which seemed to confirm his stories. He'd text her photos: a coffee cup from a Boston cafe, a sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge, his hotel room key card on a nightstand. The evidence was there. The consistency was there. But something nagged at Sarah, a whisper in the back of her mind that grew slightly louder with each trip. One Thursday night, when Daniel was supposedly in Seattle, Sarah sat on the couch with her phone, staring at a photo he'd sent of the Space Needle at sunset. She reverse image searched it on Google and found the exact same photo on a stock photography website, uploaded 3 years ago. Her blood ran cold. She immediately called him. "Hey, baby," he answered on the second ring, sounding relaxed and happy. "I was just thinking about you." "Daniel," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "that photo you sent me of the Space Needle, it's not yours." "It's from the internet." There was a pause, barely a heartbeat, but Sarah felt it stretch like taffy. Then Daniel laughed, a sound so genuine and amused that she felt foolish. "Oh my God, Sarah!" "I'm so sorry, I was in such a rush earlier. I grabbed the first Seattle image I saw online because my phone was dead and I wanted to send you something." "I'm an idiot. Let me send you a real one right now." 30 seconds later, a new photo arrived. Daniel's hand holding his phone up to the Space Needle. The timestamp clearly visible, his hotel key card visible in the frame. Sarah exhaled slowly, feeling embarrassed and paranoid. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Hey, Daniel interrupted gently. "Don't apologize. Your trust means everything to me. I never want you to doubt me. I love you." She believed him. God help her, she believed every word. But if Daniel was really in Seattle, why did he have a stock photo ready to send in the first place? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late February, slipped through the mail slot while Sarah was at work. When she came home that evening, Exhausted after a double shift, she kicked off her shoes and sorted through the stack of bills and junk mail on her welcome mat. Most of it was the usual stuff: utility bills, credit card offers, grocery store coupons. But one envelope made her pause. It was a credit card statement from Chase Bank, the plastic window showing an address label that read, David Shaw, 2847 W. Fullerton Ave, Apt 3B, Sarah's apartment. Her address. But the wrong first name? She stood in the entryway, still holding her nurse's bag, staring at the envelope as her heart began to beat faster. David Shaw, not Daniel Shaw. David. The name sat wrong in her mouth as she whispered it aloud, testing how it sounded. She turned the envelope over in her hands, noticing it had already been opened, a clean slice along the top edge. Had Daniel opened it? Why would he open mail addressed to David? She pulled out the statement with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the charges. $3,847 spent at luxury retailers she'd never heard of. Restaurants and cities Daniel had supposedly visited for work, and a $1,200 charge at a jewelry store in Las Vegas. When Daniel came home an hour later, Sarah was sitting on the couch with the statement in her lap, her whole body rigid with tension. He walked through the door with Thai takeout and his usual warm smile, but it faltered when he saw her face. "Baby, what's wrong?" he asked, setting down the food and coming toward her. Sarah held up the envelope, her hand shaking slightly. "This came today. It's addressed to David Shaw." Who's David? For just a fraction of a second, so brief she almost missed it, something flickered across Daniel's face. Something cold and calculating. But then it was gone, replaced by his familiar, easy smile. He laughed, actually laughed, and sat down beside her. "Oh my God, I completely forgot to tell you about that. David is my middle name, Daniel David Shaw. I use it for business credit cards sometimes. It helps me keep my personal and professional expenses separate for tax purposes." He took the statement from her hands and glanced at it casually. "Yeah, these are all client dinners and business expenses. My accountant actually suggested I do it this way. I should have told you. I'm sorry if it worried you." The explanation sounded so reasonable, so mundane. Sarah wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But something in her gut twisted painfully, like an animal sensing danger. If it was just for business, why had Sarah never heard the name David before in 9 months together? Part 2. The whispered phone calls started happening more frequently after the credit card incident, Daniel taking calls in the other room, his voice dropping to a hushed murmur that Sarah couldn't quite make out through the walls. She'd be cooking dinner or folding laundry, and his phone would ring with a number that wasn't saved in his contacts, just a string of digits on the screen. "Excuse me, work call," he'd say, kissing her cheek and stepping into the bedroom, closing the door behind him with a soft click that felt somehow final, like a barrier being erected. Sarah would stand in the kitchen, her hands submerged in soapy dishwater, straining to hear words through the walls. Sometimes she caught fragments, ... can't talk right now ... or ... next week, I promise ... or once chillingly, ... she doesn't know anything. Her stomach would knot up tight, her breath coming shallow. Who was she? Wouldn't she know? One evening in early March, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. Daniel was in the bedroom, his voice a low rumble behind the closed door, and she crept closer, pressing her ear against the wood. Her heart pounded so loud she was afraid he'd hear it. "I told you not to call this number," Daniel was saying, his voice harder than she'd ever heard it, stripped of all its usual warmth. I'll have it by Friday. Just know, listen to me. I said Friday. I always deliver, don't I? There was a long pause, then, fine, this is the last time. After this, we're done. The call ended abruptly, and Sarah barely had time to jump back before the door swung open. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face slightly flushed, but when he saw her, his expression immediately softened. Hey, I was just coming to find you. That call took forever boring financial stuff. He pulled her into a hug, but Sarah's body was stiff, unresponsive. Who are you talking to? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. She felt him tense for just a moment before he relaxed. Client dispute. Rich people problems, they're never happy with their returns, even when I'm making them money. He pulled back and looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. Why? What's wrong? Sarah opened her mouth to say everything that was wrong. The strange name on the credit card. The constant trips, the hushed phone calls. The feeling that she was living with a stranger wearing a Daniel Shaw mask. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped behind layers of love and hope, and the desperate need to believe that her fairy tale was real. What would happen on Friday? And who was Daniel really talking to? Part 3. The friends warning Jennifer had been Sarah's best friend since nursing school, 15 years of shared secrets, late-night study sessions, and unwavering loyalty. So when she called Sarah one Saturday morning and asked to meet for coffee urgently, Sarah knew something was wrong. They met at their usual spot, a small cafe near the hospital where they'd spent countless hours dissecting bad dates and celebrating small victories. But today, Jennifer's face was serious, almost worried, as she stirred her latte without drinking it. I need to talk to you about Daniel, Jennifer said without preamble, her voice low. Sarah felt her defenses immediately snap into place, her shoulders tensing. What about him? Jennifer pulled out her phone and opened a browser window, turning it so Sarah could see the screen. I tried to look him up. I know you think I'm being overprotective, but Sarah, I couldn't find anything substantial about him. His consulting firm, Shaw Investment Solutions, there's barely a website. No client testimonials, no professional history, no licenses registered with the state. I checked the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. There's no Daniel Shaw listed as a licensed investment advisor. Sarah's coffee turned to acid in her stomach. She stared at the phone screen, at the bare bones website that looked like it had been thrown together in an afternoon's stock photos. Generic text about financial success and trusted guidance, but nothing real, nothing concrete. Maybe he works for a larger firm, Sarah said weakly, but even she could hear the doubt in her own voice. Maybe his personal name isn't on the registration. Maybe... Sarah... Jennifer's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid. I'm not trying to ruin your happiness. I'm really not. But something feels off about this guy. The way he moved in so fast, the joint bank account, the constant traveling with no real details. You're jealous, Sarah snapped, yanking her hand away. The words came out before she could stop them, sharp and cruel. You're jealous because I finally found someone and you're still alone. Jennifer's face paled, hurt flashing across her features like a slap. The cafe seemed to go quiet around them, or maybe that was just the roaring in Sarah's ears. I'm not jealous, Jennifer said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. I'm scared for you, and I hope to God I'm wrong. I really do. But please just check into him. For your own peace of mind. Look at your bank statements. Ask to meet his family, his colleagues. Ask real questions and pay attention to whether he actually answers them. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I have to go. I have a shift in an hour." She walked out of the cafe without looking back, but she could feel Jennifer's eyes on her, worried and sad. As Sarah drove to the hospital, tears streaming down her face, she realized something terrifying. She was angry at Jennifer for asking questions because, deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, Sarah was afraid of the answers. Was Jennifer's warning the last chance Sarah had to escape before everything collapsed? October 15th started like any other Tuesday. Sarah's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., the shrill beeping cutting through the darkness of her bedroom. Daniel was already gone on another business trip, this time supposedly to Denver for a 3-day conference on investment strategies. She kissed him goodbye the night before, watched him pack his leather briefcase with files she'd never actually seen him read, and waved from the window as his Uber pulled away. The hospital was busy that morning, the pediatric ward filled with the usual chaos of crying children, worried parents, and the constant beeping of monitors. Sarah moved through her rounds mechanically, checking vitals on a 6-year-old with pneumonia, comforting a terrified 4-year-old who needed blood drawn, adjusting 4 drips, and dispensing medications with practice deficiency. She was good at her job, great at it, actually. Kids trusted her because she never lied to them about whether something would hurt, and parents trusted her because she treated their children like they were her own. At 10:47 a.m., while Sarah was reviewing a chart at the nurse's station, her phone buzzed in her scrubs pocket. The caller ID read First National Bank, Fraud Prevention. Her heart did a strange little skip, but she told herself it was probably nothing, a routine verification. Maybe a suspicious charge from one of Daniel's business trips that the bank wanted to confirm. "This is Sarah Mitchell," she answered, stepping into an empty patient room for privacy. The voice on the other end was professional, female, carefully neutral. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Chun from First National Bank's Fraud Prevention Department. We've detected some highly unusual activity on your accounts, and we need to speak with you immediately. Are you somewhere you can talk privately?" The word unusual hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her legs suddenly felt weak, and she sat down on the edge of the empty hospital bed, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. "What kind of unusual activity?" she asked, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. Rebecca's pause lasted only 2 seconds, but to Sarah it felt like falling through space. "Ms. Mitchell, we've detected multiple large withdrawals and transfers from your accounts over the past 72 hours. I need to verify some transactions with you right now." What had Daniel done while Sarah slept, trusting and unaware? Rebecca's voice remained calm and professional as she began listing transactions, but each one felt like a knife sliding between Sarah's ribs. On October 13th at 2:17 a.m., there was a wire transfer of $8,000 from your joint savings account to an account at Cayman International Bank. On October 13th at 3:45 a.m., a cash withdrawal of $12,000 from an ATM in Las Vegas, Nevada. On October 14th, 3 credit cards were opened in your name: Chase Sapphire Reserve, American Express Platinum, and Capital One Venture, all maxed out within 6 hours of activation. Total charges, $47,000. On October 14th at 11:30 p.m., another wire transfer of $15,000 to an offshore account in the British Virgin Islands. Sarah couldn't breathe. The hospital room spun around her, the walls closing in like a collapsing tunnel. She heard herself making a sound, a gasp or a sob. She wasn't sure which. The numbers kept coming, an endless avalanche of financial destruction. Her savings account, drained to zero. Her checking account, overdrawn by $3,000. Credit cards she'd never applied for, opened, maxed out, and defaulted. Her emergency fund built up over 5 years of careful saving. Every extra shift she worked, every vacation she'd skipped, every time she'd chosen the cheaper option, gone. All of it, gone. There's more, Miss Mitchell, Rebecca continued, her voice growing more concerned. We've also detected that someone used your social security number to take out a personal loan for $25,000 from an online lender. The money was transferred to an account we can't trace. And your apartment address has been used to register 4 separate business entities and Delaware shell corporations that appear to be involved in money laundering. Sarah's stomach heaved. She pressed her free hand against her mouth, fighting the urge to vomit right there on the hospital floor. That's impossible, she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't impossible. It was real. It was happening. It had already happened. Ms. Mitchell, Rebecca said gently, I need to ask you some questions. Did you authorize any of these transactions? Do you have any knowledge of these accounts or credit cards? No, Sarah choked out. No, I didn't. I would never, but then her brain caught up with her heart, and the truth crashed over her like a freezing wave. The joint account. The account she created with Daniel. The account where she deposited $15,000 of her own money. The account he had full access to with his own debit card, his own online banking login. My fiancé, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Daniel Shaw. He has access to the joint account. Oh my God. Rebecca's voice shifted, becoming more urgent. Ms. Mitchell, do you know where Daniel Shaw is right now? We need to contact him immediately. And I'm going to transfer you to our fraud investigation team. You may also need to file a police report. This appears to be a case of identity theft and financial fraud. How long had Daniel been planning this devastation, and how many other women had he destroyed? Sarah left the hospital immediately, telling her supervisor she had a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie. Her entire life was the emergency. She drove home in a daze, running 2 red lights without even noticing. Her mind replaying every moment with Daniel like a horror film she couldn't pause. The apartment looked exactly as she'd left it that morning, her coffee mug still in the sink, the bed unmade, Daniel's clothes still hanging in the closet. But something felt different now, contaminated like crime scene tape should be stretched across the doorway. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and called Daniel's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. His voice, that smooth, warm, lying voice said, You've reached Daniel Shaw. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. She called again. Voicemail? Again. Voicemail. 17 times she called, her desperation growing with each unanswered ring, until finally his phone just went straight to voicemail without ringing at all. He turned it off, or blocked her, or thrown it away. She texted him, Daniel, please call me. The bank called. I need to talk to you right now. Please. No response. The delivered notification never appeared. The message just sat there unsent, blocked. Sarah opened her laptop with trembling fingers and logged into their joint bank account. The password he'd helped her create, Sarah Daniel 2024 forever. The irony made her want to scream. The account balance showed $0.00. Transaction history showed systematic withdrawals over the past 3 months, small amounts at first. $200 here, $500 there. Amounts she'd never noticed because Daniel had always said he was contributing to wedding expenses or handling vendor deposits. But in the past week, the withdrawals had become aggressive, desperate. $2,000, $5,000, $8,000, all at odd hours, all from locations that didn't match where he'd claimed to be. Then she checked his side of the closet. the side with the expensive suits and designer shoes. She pulled open drawers, searching for something, anything that might explain this nightmare. And that's when she found it. His laptop, the one he usually kept with him, tucked under a pile of sweaters in the back of the closet. Her heart pounding, Sarah opened it. The screen flickered to life, showing a login page. No saved password, no automatic login. But there was a sticker on the bottom of the laptop, a barcode, and a serial number. And beneath it, written in small print, property of Daniel Marcus. Serial hashtag DM-2847. Daniel Marcus. Not Daniel Shaw. Another name. Another identity. Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she tried random passwords, their anniversary, her birthday, combinations of their names. Nothing worked. After the 5th attempt, the screen displayed a message. Too many failed login attempts. Device locked. All data has been remotely wiped. He'd known she would look. He'd planned for this moment. He'd planned everything. Who was Daniel Shaw, and had that name ever been real at all? The police station smelled like stale coffee, disinfectant, and the accumulated despair of thousands of victims who'd walked through its doors, seeking justice they might never find. Sarah sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, clutching a folder stuffed with bank statements, printed emails, and photos of Daniel, evidence of a relationship that had been a calculated lie from the very beginning. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, a fine tremor that made the papers rattle softly. Around her, the station buzzed with activity, officers typing reports, phones ringing incessantly, a drunk man arguing loudly at the front desk about a parking ticket. Sarah felt disconnected from all of it, like she was watching her life happen to someone else from behind a thick pane of glass. "Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice cut through the noise. Sarah looked up to see a detective in her late 40s approaching Latina, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, sharp eyes that had clearly seen too much human ugliness. "I'm Detective Maria Rodriguez. Come with me." They walked through a maze of cubicles to a small interview room, gray walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a metal table bolted to the floor. It looked exactly like the interrogation rooms in crime shows, and Sarah felt a wave of unreality wash over her. This couldn't be her life. Just 3 months ago, she'd been planning a wedding, picking out flowers, tasting cakes. "Tell me everything," Detective Rodriguez said, pulling out a notebook and clicking her pen. "Start from the beginning. How did you meet Daniel Shaw?" Sarah's voice cracked as she began the story, the charity fundraiser, the whirlwind romance, moving in together, the joint bank account. With each detail, she felt more foolish, more complicit in her own destruction. "I know how this sounds," she whispered at one point, tears streaming down her face. "I know I should have seen the signs. I should have questioned more, investigated more, protected myself better." Detective Rodriguez looked up from her notes, her expression softening. "Miss Mitchell, I need you to understand something. What happened to you is not your fault. These criminals are professionals. They study human psychology. They exploit normal human needs for love and connection. They're very, very good at what they do." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm going to be honest with you, this isn't the first case like this I've seen. Not even this month. And based on what you're telling me, I don't think you're Daniel Shaw's first victim either." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, not just heartbreak, but the complete shattering of her understanding of reality. How many other women were out there, destroyed by the same man? Detective Rodriguez worked quickly, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she pulled up databases that Sarah didn't even know existed. Let me run his name and see what comes up, she muttered, her eyes scanning screens filled with information. Minutes passed in tense silence. Sarah watched the detective's expression change confusion, then concern, then something darker. "Ms. Mitchell?" Rodriguez finally said, turning her monitor so Sarah could see. "There is a Daniel Shaw who's a licensed investment consultant in Illinois. But according to this, he died 3 years ago in a car accident in Springfield. He was 47 years old, married with 2 kids. Sarah stared at the screen. There was a professional headshot of a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind smile. He looked nothing like the Daniel she knew. Nothing. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "The man I've been living with, who is he?" Rodriguez pulled up more screens, running facial recognition software, cross-referencing databases, making phone calls to other departments. The investigation unfolded like a nightmare in real time. An hour later, she had preliminary answers. The man you know as Daniel Shaw appears to be using a stolen identity. The real Daniel Shaw's credentials were taken after his death: social security number, professional licenses, even his LinkedIn profile. Someone we don't know who yet carefully reconstructed his identity and has been using it to commit fraud. Rodriguez pulled up a map of the United States, marked with red pins in different cities. Over the past 5 years, we've had reports matching the same pattern. Chicago, Seattle, Boston, Miami, Denver, Phoenix. Women reporting similar scams: charming man, whirlwind romance, joint financial accounts, then disappearance along with all their money. Different names, but the same EO. Same psychological manipulation tactics. She clicked on each pin. And case files appeared: faces of women, their ages ranging from late 20s to early 50s. Their stories heartbreakingly similar to Sarah's. A teacher in Seattle who lost $80,000. A lawyer in Boston who lost her house. A small business owner in Miami whose company went bankrupt after he drained her accounts. Each woman stared out from her police photo with the same expression Sarah recognized from her own mirror: devastation, shame, disbelief. "We've been trying to connect these cases for 2 years, Rodriguez continued. "But he's smart. He uses different names, different appearances sometimes. He wears glasses. Sometimes contacts change his eye color. Sometimes he gains or loses weight between targets. He operates across state lines, which makes jurisdiction complicated. And he's always careful not to leave physical evidence." Sarah felt sick. "So you're telling me you knew this person existed and you couldn't stop him?" Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "We suspected. But without solid evidence, without being able to identify him definitively, we couldn't make an arrest. He's a ghost, Miss Mitchell, and ghosts are very hard to catch. How long had this monster been hunting women, and why hadn't anyone stopped him?" Sarah returned home that evening with a police escort officer, Kim, a young woman who seemed genuinely sympathetic to Sarah's situation. "I'm just going to wait out here while you go through your apartment," Kim said gently. "Look for anything that seems off, anything that might help the investigation. Documents, receipts, anything he might have left behind." Sarah nodded numbly and entered her apartment alone. It felt violated now, every surface tainted by Daniel's lies. She started in the bedroom, going through the closet methodically. His suits still hung there, perfectly pressed, mocking her with their expensive fabric and perfect tailoring. She checked the pockets empty. She pulled apart the lining, nothing. Then she remembered something. A week ago, she'd found a loose floorboard near the closet when she dropped an earring. She'd meant to tell the landlord but had forgotten. Now Sarah knelt down, pried up that board with shaking fingers. Underneath was a small metal box, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. No lock, just a simple latch. Inside were things that made Sarah's blood run cold. First, 4 passports, each with Daniel's photo, but different names. Marcus Cole, David Shaw, Daniel Martinez, Michael Stone. In each photo, he looks slightly different, clean-shaven in one, bearded in another. Different hairstyles, different glasses. But it was him. Undeniably him. Second, a stack of credit cards, at least 20 of them, all in different names. Some had women's names on them, names Sarah didn't recognize. Other victims, she realized with horror. He kept their credit cards like trophies. Third, a small notebook filled with handwritten notes. Sarah opened it with trembling hands and began to read. What she found was a systematic catalog of manipulation. Each page was dedicated to a different woman's physical descriptions, psychological profiles, vulnerabilities to exploit. Sarah Mee, pediatric nurse. Late 30s, wants marriage and family. Emotionally open, trusts easily. Financially stable, no close family nearby. Best friend, can be isolated. The clinical coldness of it made Sarah drop the notebook like it was on fire. He'd studied her, analyzed her, identified exactly which emotional buttons to push to make her fall in love with him. She wasn't a person to him, she was a mark, a target, a source of income. At the bottom of the box was a photograph that made Sarah's heart stop. It was her, taken from a distance, weeks before they'd supposedly met at the charity fundraiser. She was leaving the hospital after a shift, still in her scrubs, completely unaware she was being watched. On the back, written in Daniel's handwriting, target acquired. Begin surveillance. He'd been stalking her before they'd ever spoken. The chance meeting, the chemistry, the instant connection, none of it had been real. It had all been theater, a performance designed to steal her money and destroy her life. How many other women's photos were hidden in places Sarah hadn't found yet? Detective Rodriguez called Sarah at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, her voice tight with barely contained urgency. Ms. Mitchell, I need you to come down to the station immediately. We've identified him. Sarah had barely slept, spending the night on Jennifer's couch because she couldn't bear to be in her apartment anymore. She'd reconciled with her best friend through tears and apologies, and Jennifer had held her without judgment, just like she always did. Now, Sarah sat across from Rodriguez in that same gray interview room, a cup of terrible station coffee growing cold between her hands. The detective slid a file across the table, thick, worn, marked with red active investigation stamps. His real name is Marcus Cole, Rodriguez began, opening the file to reveal a booking photo from 7 years ago. The man in the photo was unmistakably Daniel, though younger with different hair, a harder expression in his eyes. He's 38 years old, originally from Newark, New Jersey. He has a criminal record going back to when he was 19: credit card fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, forgery. He served 2 short prison sentences, but he always gets out and starts again. More sophisticated each time. Sarah stared at the photo, at the stranger who'd shared her bed, who'd kissed her goodnight, who'd told her he loved her. Marcus Cole, she whispered, testing the real name on her tongue. It tasted like poison. Rodriguez continued, pulling out more documents, arrest records, victim statements, surveillance photos. We've now connected him definitively to 8 other women over the past 6 years. The FBI's been tracking him, but he's slippery. He never stays in one place long enough for us to build a solid case. He has burner phones, fake IDs, sophisticated identity theft techniques. He studies his victims for weeks or even months before making contact, learning everything about them, their habits, their vulnerabilities, their financial situations. The detective pulled out another photo, Marcus, with a different woman, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at a restaurant. This is Rachel Chun from Seattle. He called himself David Martinez with her. Investment banker, supposedly. She lost $80,000 and her business went bankrupt. She attempted suicide 6 months after he disappeared. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. She survived? She's in therapy, rebuilding her life. But it took her 2 years to even be able to talk about what happened. Rodriguez's voice was hard now, angry on behalf of all these women. And this, another photo, another smiling couple, is Angela Morrison from Phoenix. He was Michael Stone to her, venture capitalist. She lost her house, her retirement savings, everything. She's now living with her elderly parents, working 2 jobs to pay off the debt he left her with. Each photo was a knife to Sarah's heart. All these women intelligent, accomplished, good women destroyed by the same predator. Why doesn't anyone stop him? Sarah demanded, her voice rising. If you know who he is, if you have all this evidence, why is he still out there? Rodriguez's expression was pained. Because he's careful. He operates across state lines, which complicates jurisdiction. He never uses violence, so he's not considered a high-priority threat. He covers his digital tracks expertly. And she paused, her jaw tight. The system isn't set up to protect women from men like this. Financial fraud doesn't get the resources it deserves, especially when it's connected to romantic relationships. Too many people think the victim should have known better, should have been more careful. How many more women would Marcus destroy before someone finally stopped him? Rodriguez pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on her laptop, clearly something she'd been building as the investigation expanded. I want to show you something, she said, turning the screen towards Sarah. This is the pattern we've identified in all of Marcus Cole's operations. Understanding it might help you process what happened. The first slide showed a flowchart. Clinical and cold. Phase 1, target selection and surveillance. Rodriguez clicked through photos of women leaving offices, shopping at grocery stores, attending events. All taken from a distance, all without the subject's knowledge. Marcus doesn't choose randomly. He selects women who are financially stable but emotionally vulnerable, recently divorced, new to a city, focused on career and wanting to settle down. He looks for women who are successful enough to have money but isolated enough to be manipulated. He watches them for weeks, learning their routines, their favorite places, their social circles. Sarah felt sick. She remembered telling Daniel early in their relationship about how she moved to Chicago for work and didn't have family nearby. How most of her college friends had moved away. How she'd been so focused on her nursing career that dating had fallen by the wayside. She'd given him the blueprint for her own destruction. Phase 2. The engineered meeting. Rodriguez continued, clicking to the next slide. He stages chance encounters that seem organic charity events. Coffee shops, grocery stores, even online dating apps using stolen photos and fake profiles. He makes it seem like fate, like destiny. He uses sophisticated psychological manipulation, mirroring your body language, adopting your interests, creating a false sense of deep connection. The detective pulled up transcripts messages Marcus had sent to different women, all eerily similar in structure. I feel like I've known you my entire life. I've never met anyone who understands me like you do. You're everything I've been searching for. Sarah had heard all these words. She believed them, had felt special, chosen. Now she understood they were scripts, lines he perfected through repetition. Phase 3, love bombing and isolation. The next slide showed gifts, romantic gestures, constant attention. He overwhelms his victims with affection, moving the relationship forward at an unnaturally fast pace. Marriage talk within months, moving in together quickly. Constant communication that makes the victim feel valued, but also dependent. And gradually he isolates them from friends and family, not obviously, but subtly, making them choose him over other relationships. Sarah thought about her fight with Jennifer, about how she'd pulled away from other friends because Daniel took up so much of her time and attention. She thought about how she'd stopped calling her parents as frequently because Daniel always seemed to have plans for them. The isolation hadn't felt like isolation. It had felt like love. Phase 4. Financial enmeshment. Rodriguez's voice grew harder. Joint bank accounts, credit cards, access to financial information. He positions it as trust, as partnership, as building a future together. And then she clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of money disappearing from accounts. He begins the systematic theft. Small amounts at first, testing boundaries, then larger and larger sums as the wedding approaches or some other major life event creates urgency and distraction. The graph showed Sarah's own financial destruction, the gradual drain of her joint account, the sudden spike in credit card applications, the final devastating withdrawals that had left her with nothing. Had Marcus ever felt anything real, or was it always just a game to him? "I want you to meet someone," Rodriguez said, standing up and opening the interview room door. A woman entered mid-40s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes that held a deep sadness Sarah recognized. "Sarah Mitchell, this is Rachel Chun from Seattle. She's the woman I mentioned earlier. She's agreed to talk to you." Rachel sat down, and for a long moment, the two women just looked at each other, seeing their own pain reflected in another person's eyes. Then Rachel reached across the table and took Sarah's hands. "I know what you're feeling right now," Rachel said softly. "The shame, the self-blame, the feeling that you should have known, should have seen it coming. I felt all of that too. I want you to know it's not your fault." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "How did you survive it? How did you keep going?" Rachel's smile was sad but genuine. "One day at a time, therapy, a lot of therapy, support groups for fraud victims. And eventually I stopped asking, how could I have been so stupid? And started asking, how could he be so cruel? The blame belongs with him, not with us." Over the next hour, Rodriguez brought in two more women, Angela Morrison from Phoenix and Melissa Rodriguez from Miami, no relation to the detective. Each one told their story, and the similarities were haunting. Marcus had used different names, different cover stories, different tactics tailored to each woman's specific vulnerabilities. But the core pattern was identical: surveillance, engineered romance, rapid escalation, financial access, systematic theft, and sudden disappearance. "He told me his parents died in a car crash, and he had no family," Angela said, tears streaming down her face. "I felt so sorry for him. I wanted to be his family. He said he was a venture capitalist who'd sold his company and was looking for the right woman to settle down with." Melissa added, "He showed me fake bank statements, fake investment portfolios. Everything looked legitimate. He knew I wanted children," Rachel whispered. "He talked about baby names, about the house we'd buy with a big backyard. He knew exactly what I needed to hear." Sarah listened to these women survivors, she realized, not victims, and felt something shifting inside her. The shame was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it was rising anger. Rage at Marcus for what he'd done. Fury at a system that had aloe. 2 weeks after that devastating phone call from the bank, Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by papers, bank statements, credit reports, collection notices, legal documents, a paper trail of systematic destruction that seemed to grow larger every day. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of paper. as she moved from one catastrophic revelation to another. Her laptop screen glowed with spreadsheet columns filled with red numbers, negative balances, debts she hadn't incurred but was somehow responsible for. Jennifer sat across from her, calculator in hand, her expression growing more horrified with each calculation. "Sarah," Jennifer said quietly, setting down the calculator with a trembling hand, "this is worse than we thought. Much worse." Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep. "How much worse?" Jennifer took a deep breath, consulting her notes. "Your joint savings account drained, obviously. That's $15,000 gone. Your personal checking account that he somehow got access to another, $7,000, but then there are the credit cards." She pulled out a stack of statements, each one marked with bright yellow highlighter. Chase Sapphire Reserve, maxed at $15,000. American Express Platinum, maxed at $20,000. Capital One Venture, maxed at $12,000, but it doesn't stop there. He also opened cards from Discover, Bank of America, and Citibank in your name, all maxed out within days. The numbers piled up like an avalanche, crushing Sarah under their weight. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "How is that even possible?" she whispered. "I never applied for those cards. I never signed anything." "Identity theft," Jennifer explained, her voice tight with anger. "He had your social security number, your date of birth, your address, your mother's maiden name, everything he needed. And because you lived together, he probably intercepted the cards when they arrived in the mail before you ever saw them." Sarah thought back to all those business trips, all those days when Marcus had been home alone in her apartment while she worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital. He'd had unlimited access to her mail, her documents, her entire life. She trusted him so completely that she'd never even thought to question it. "What about the loan?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would destroy her. Jennifer's expression darkened. "The personal loan from Easy Money lenders, it's for $25,000. The interest rate is predatory, 29.9% APR. They sent the money to a bank account in Delaware that we can't trace. You're listed as the borrower. Your signature was forged on digital documents. And because it's been over 30 days since disbursement, they're now demanding payment. If you don't pay, they're threatening to sue." Sarah's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I don't have $25,000. I don't even have $2,500. He took everything. How is Sarah supposed to pay for crimes committed against her?" The phone calls started coming daily, then hourly. Collection agencies with aggressive voices demanding payment for debts Sarah didn't create. Credit card companies threatening lawsuits. The payday loan company sending emails with subject lines like "final notice" and "legal action pending." Sarah's phone became an instrument of torture, buzzing constantly with unknown numbers, each call a fresh reminder of her destroyed financial life. She started letting them all go to voicemail, but the messages piled up 20, 30, 40 messages a day. Some were polite but firm. Others were borderline threatening. "Ms. Mitchell, this is your third and final notice. If we don't receive payment within 10 business days, we will be forced to pursue legal remedies including wage garnishment and property seizure." But it was worse than just the calls. Sarah's credit score, once a respectable 780 that she'd carefully cultivated over a decade of responsible financial behavior, had plummeted to 420. When she pulled her credit report, it was pages long filled with late payments, maxed out accounts, collection notices, and derogatory marks that would haunt her for 7 years. She'd applied for a small personal loan to help cover her rent denied. She'd tried to get a new credit card to consolidate some of the debt denied. She even applied for a balance transfer offer she'd received in the mail denied. with a letter explaining that her recent credit history indicates significant financial instability. The wedding venue called, their tone shifting from congratulatory to coldly businesslike. "Miss Mitchell, we understand your situation, but our contract is clear. You put down a $5,000 deposit with a cancellation clause. If you cancel less than 6 months before the wedding date, we keep the entire deposit. We're sorry, but business is business." $5,000 gone. Money she'd saved by working extra weekend shifts, by packing lunches instead of eating out, by choosing the cheaper option every single time. The caterer wanted their deposit to $3,000, the photographer $1,500, the florist $800. Everyone wanted money she no longer had, for a wedding that would never happen, to a man who'd never existed. Sarah's sister called from California, her voice tight with worry. "Mom and Dad already bought plane tickets. They can't get refunds. Sarah, they're retired. They're on a fixed income that's $900 they can't afford to lose." The guilt was suffocating. Sarah had invited 37 people to a wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Her parents, her siblings, her aunts and uncles, her college friends who planned to fly in from across the country. Now they all had to be called, told the truth, informed that the man they'd met and liked and toasted had been a con artist, a predator, a ghost. The shame was unbearable. Sarah found herself crying at random moments. In the grocery store when she realized she couldn't afford the name brand items she usually bought. At the gas station when her card was declined. At home when she opened her laptop and saw the email from her landlord, "Rent is 3 days late. Please submit payment immediately or we'll need to discuss next steps." How do you rebuild a life when every foundation has been systematically demolished? The stress began affecting Sarah's work in ways she couldn't hide. During a routine medication administration, she found herself staring at the dosage chart, unable to make her brain process the simple calculation. The numbers swam in front of her eyes, meaningless symbols that refused to form coherent meaning. "Sarah?" Her colleague Monica touched her shoulder gently. "Are you okay? You've been standing there for 5 minutes." Sarah blinked, realizing she was holding a syringe, a 6-year-old patient waiting for her injection, and she couldn't remember what medication she was supposed to be administering. The realization terrified her. She checked the chart again, double-checked the medication, triple-checked the dosage. Her hands were shaking so badly that Monica had to take over. Later, her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, called her into the office. The older woman's face was kind but concerned, the expression of someone about to deliver bad news they wish they didn't have to share. "Sarah, I've noticed you've been struggling lately. Your focus is off. You're making minor mistakes. You seem exhausted. I know you're going through something difficult. You mentioned a personal situation, but I need to know if you're able to safely care for patients right now." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah had been a nurse for 12 years. Her job was her identity, her purpose, the one thing she'd always been good at. The idea that she might not be able to do it anymore, that Marcus had stolen even this from her, was almost more than she could bear. "I can do my job," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Hernandez sighed. "I'm not questioning your abilities or your commitment, but Sarah, you're showing signs of severe stress and possible depression. You've lost weight. I'd estimate about 15 pounds in the past month. You have dark circles under your eyes that suggest you're not sleeping. Yesterday, you snapped at a parent who asked a legitimate question about their child's treatment." Sarah didn't remember snapping at anyone. That was the most terrifying part. Her memory was becoming unreliable, her emotional control slipping. "I'm recommending you take medical leave," Dr. Hernandez continued gently. We have FMLA provisions for situations like this. You've been through trauma, Sarah. What happened to you? Identity theft. Financial fraud by an intimate partner. It's a form of intimate partner violence. You need time to heal, to get help, to process everything that's happened. The words medical leave meant no paycheck, no income, no way to pay rent, to pay the mounting debts, to rebuild her shattered financial life. But Dr. Hernandez was right. Sarah could feel herself unraveling, thread by thread, and she was terrified of what might happen if she kept trying to hold it together through sheer willpower alone. How long? Sarah asked quietly. At least 6 weeks. Maybe longer. And I'm strongly recommending therapy. The hospital has an employee assistance program that covers mental health services. Please use it. That night, Sarah sat in her car outside the hospital after her shift, unable to make herself drive home to the apartment that reminded her of Marcus with every surface, every corner, every breath. She pulled out her phone and looked at her bank balance, $127.43. She had no savings, no safety net, no way to pay next month's rent. The collection calls continued buzzing, 17 missed calls just during her shift. Her email inbox showed another batch of past. 8 weeks after the bank's phone call, Sarah sat in her car in the hospital parking lot at 2:37 a.m., engine off, heat gradually fading, watching her breath form clouds in the cold November air. She'd driven here after another sleepless night. Another series of nightmares where Marcus's face morphed into something monstrous. Another panic attack that left her gasping on the bathroom floor. But she couldn't make herself go inside. The thought of putting on her scrubs, of forcing a smile for frightened children, of pretending to be the competent, caring nurse everyone expected, it was impossible. The weight of it crushed her chest until breathing felt like drowning. Her phone sat dark and silent in the cup holder. She'd finally turned off the ringer after the 200th collection call, but she could see the notification count climbing: 43 missed calls, 127 unread text messages, emails piling up with subject lines that screamed her failure, account overdrawn, final legal notice, eviction proceedings. Sarah had stopped opening them 3 days ago. What was the point? She had no money, no solutions, no way to fix any of it. The medical leave had started 2 weeks earlier. No paycheck. She'd applied for short-term disability, but the paperwork was Byzantine and the approval could take months. Her savings were gone. Her credit cards were maxed out by someone else's purchases. She'd asked her parents for help, but they were retired on a fixed income and had already lost money on the wedding travel arrangements. Her sister had sent $500, which had immediately gone to past due electric and water bills. She'd sold her grandmother's pearl necklace, a family heirloom, to a pawn shop for $200, crying the entire drive home. In her lap sat an envelope from her landlord, 30-day eviction notice. She was 2 months behind on rent, and despite her explanations about identity theft and fraud, the landlord had been unsympathetic. "I'm sorry about your situation, but I have a mortgage to pay. If you can't come up with $3,400 by December 1st, you'll need to vacate the premises." December 1st was 5 days away. Sarah had $23 in her checking account and a car with a quarter tank of gas. She'd applied for emergency assistance programs, but the waiting lists were months long. She contacted legal aid, but they were overwhelmed and understaffed. She'd filed police reports, fraud claims, disputes with every credit bureau, but the wheels of justice moved so slowly while her life collapsed and fast forward. A text message lit up her phone screen. "Jennifer, Sarah, please answer me. I'm worried about you. I love you. Please just let me know you're okay." But Sarah wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay in weeks. The depression had settled over her like a heavy blanket she couldn't kick off, suffocating and inescapable. She'd stopped showering regularly. She ate 1 meal a day, sometimes less. She'd lost 20 pounds, her scrubs hanging loose on her frame. She'd started having dark thoughts about how much easier everything would be if she just disappeared, if she just stopped fighting, if she just gave up. The thought terrified her, but it also whispered seductively in her darkest moments, you could make all this pain stop. You could just ... rest. Was Marcus's final victory going to be Sarah's complete destruction? Dr. Lisa Chun's therapy office was nothing like Sarah expected. Instead of the cold, clinical space she'd imagined, it was warm and inviting, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, plants in the corners, and a box of tissues that wasn't trying to hide its purpose. Sarah had only agreed to come because Jennifer had made the appointment, driven her there, and physically walked her into the building. I'll be right here when you're done, Jennifer had said, squeezing her hand. Now Sarah sat across from Dr. Chunna, woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every possible human confession and judged none of them. For the first 10 minutes, Sarah couldn't speak. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, while Dr. Chun waited patiently, not pushing, not forcing, just present. I feel so stupid, Sarah finally whispered, the first words breaking something open inside her. Everyone keeps saying it's not my fault, but I let him into my life. I gave him access to everything. I ignored all the red flags. How is that not my fault? Dr. Chun leaned forward slightly. Sarah, I want you to imagine a scenario. You're walking down the street, and someone comes up behind you and violently robs you, takes your purse, your phone, everything. Would you blame yourself for that? No, Sarah said quietly. Of course not. Why not? Dr. Chun asked. Because the robber made a choice to hurt me. That was their decision, their action. Exactly. Now, what Marcus did to you was also robbery. It was just more sophisticated, more psychological, more deliberately cruel. He studied you. He identified your vulnerabilities. He crafted a persona specifically designed to exploit your normal, healthy desire for love and connection. The fact that he used romance as his weapon instead of violence doesn't make you complicit. It makes him more dangerous. Sarah shook her head, the words not quite penetrating the wall of self-blame she'd built. But there were signs. Things I should have noticed. The weird credit card with a different name, the phone calls he'd take in private. My friend trying to warn me. Let me ask you something, Dr. Chun interrupted gently. When you're caring for a child at the hospital and a parent brings them in with what looks like a simple cold, but it turns out to be something serious, do you blame the parent for not diagnosing it themselves? No, they're not doctors. They don't have medical training. Exactly. And you're not a criminal psychologist. You're not a fraud investigator. You had no training in how to identify a sophisticated con artist who'd been perfecting his techniques for years. Marcus made a career out of fooling people. Multiple intelligent, successful women fell for his act because he was that good at what he did. Dr. Chun pulled out a folder and opened it to show Sarah research articles about romance scams and financial fraud. This is my specialty, helping victims of intimate partner financial abuse. And I want you to understand something crucial. What happened to you is a recognized form of trauma. It has a name: financial intimate partner violence. And it causes PTSD symptoms just as severe as physical violence. Sarah stared at the articles, seeing terms like coercive control, psychological manipulation, and traumatic bonding. Words that described what she'd experienced. That gave it shape and meaning beyond her own perceived stupidity. I keep having nightmares, Sarah admitted. I dream that he's in my apartment going through my things, and I'm frozen. I can't move or scream or stop him. I wake up gasping, my heart racing. And during the day, I have panic attacks. My chest gets tight. I can't breathe. I feel like I'm dying. Those are classic PTSD symptoms, Dr. Chun said. Your nervous system is stuck in threat mode because you experienced a profound betrayal by someone you trusted intimately. Your brain is trying to protect you by staying hypervigilant, but it's exhausting and unsustainable. Could therapy heal wounds this deep, or was Sarah broken beyond repair? Dr. Chun suggested Sarah attend a support group for financial fraud victims that met every Thursday evening at a community center downtown. Sarah almost didn't go. The idea of sitting in a circle with strangers, sharing her shame, felt impossible. But Jennifer offered to drive her, and Sarah was so tired of fighting that she agreed. The room was small and plain, with folding chairs arranged in a circle and a coffee maker brewing in the corner. 7 people sat waiting, 6 women and 1 man, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 60s. They all had the same look in their eyes that Sarah recognized from her own mirror. Trauma survivors, trying to piece their lives back together. The group leader, a woman named Patricia who'd lost her retirement savings to a romance scammer 5 years earlier, welcomed Sarah warmly. You don't have to share if you don't want to. Just listen. You're safe here. Everyone in this room understands what you're going through because we've all been there. One by one, people shared their stories. Margaret, a 63-year-old widow, had met a man on a dating website who claimed to be a military contractor overseas. After 6 months of daily emails and phone calls, he convinced her to wire him $75,000 for an emergency. She'd never heard from him again. James, a 32-year-old tech worker, had fallen for a woman he'd met online who convinced him she was being held hostage by an abusive ex and needed money to escape. He'd sent $50,000 before realizing the photos she'd sent were stolen from a model's Instagram account. The woman had never existed. Yolanda, a 47-year-old teacher, had experienced almost exactly what Sarah had: a whirlwind romance. Rapid engagement, joint finances, and complete financial devastation when the man disappeared. I tried to kill myself, Yolanda said quietly, and the room went silent. 6 months after he left, I couldn't take the shame anymore. The debt collectors. The feeling of being the stupidest person alive. I took a bottle of pills. My daughter found me and called 911. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. That was 3 years ago. I'm still in debt. My credit is still destroyed. But I'm alive. And I've learned something important surviving. This makes us warriors, not victims. We're not weak for being fooled by professionals. We're strong for still being here. Sarah felt summoned. Detective Rodriguez's call came on a gray December morning while Sarah was sitting in her nearly empty apartment, surrounded by boxes. The eviction had been temporarily stayed thanks to a legal aid attorney who'd taken her case pro bono. But Sarah had already started packing, accepting the inevitable. She applied for a room in a shared house across town, smaller, cheaper, farther from the hospital, but all she could afford on her disability payments. The phone rang and Sarah almost didn't answer. Too many collection calls, too many automated voices demanding money she didn't have. But the caller ID showed Detective Rodriguez's name, and Sarah's heart immediately started racing. Ms. Mitchell, Rodriguez said, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. We've got something. A woman in Seattle filed a report 2 days ago. Same pattern as yours: whirlwind romance, joint finances, sudden disappearance. But this time, he made a mistake. Sarah's hand tightened around the phone. What kind of mistake? He used a fake ID to withdraw cash from a bank, But the teller got suspicious and hit the silent alarm. Security footage caught him. High definition, multiple angles. Facial recognition software got a positive match to surveillance footage from Chicago. From your apartment building, from the ATM where he withdrew your money in Las Vegas. We have him. Sarah, we know what he looks like now, current appearance. And we've got the FBI involved. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something other than despair. She felt rage. Pure, clean, focusing rage. Where is he? Did you catch him? Rodriguez's pause made Sarah's stomach drop. Not yet. He got away before police arrived at the bank. But here's what's important. A woman he was targeting in Seattle, her name is Emily Park, and she's agreed to help us. We want to set up a sting operation and Sarah ... We need your help too. What kind of help? Sarah asked, though she already knew she'd say yes to whatever Rodriguez asked. She'd do anything to stop Marcus from destroying another life. We need you to help us build a comprehensive profile of his methods. Everything you remember, every manipulation tactic, every lie, every way he gained your trust. We're working with FBI behavioral analysts to create a predictive model. If we can anticipate his next move, we can catch him. Rodriguez paused. And there's something else. We found his storage unit in Gary, Indiana. He'd been renting it under one of his aliases. Sarah, what we found there, you need to see it. Can you come to the station this afternoon? 3 hours later, Sarah sat in a FBI field office conference room, facing Detective Rodriguez and 2 FBI agents, Special Agent Marcus Chen and Special Agent Dakota Williams. They'd spread evidence across a large table. Computers, hard drives, phones, documents, and photographs. So many photographs. This is from the storage unit, Agent Chen explained, gesturing to the array of evidence. Marcus Cole has been operating this con for at least 8 years that we can confirm, possibly longer. What you're looking at is his archive. Sarah's hands trembled as she looked at the photographs. Dozens of women, all smiling, all obviously in love, all unaware they were dating a predator. Some photos were candid shots taken from a distance. Others were couple photos, Marcus's arm around women of different ages, different races, different backgrounds. In each photo, he looked slightly different. Sometimes he had a beard. Sometimes he wore glasses. Sometimes his hair was different lengths or colors. But it was always him. Always that same calculating look behind the smile when you knew what to look for. We've identified 23 victims so far, Agent Williams said, her voice tight with controlled anger. 23 women across 12 states over 8 years. Conservative estimate of financial damage is over $2 million, not counting the emotional and psychological harm. $2 million. 23 women. Sarah felt sick. But it gets worse, Rodriguez added grimly, pulling out a laptop and opening a file. We found detailed record spreadsheets tracking each woman's financial information, psychological profiles, notes on vulnerabilities. He rated them on profitability potential. It was a business to him. A systematic operation with you and these other women as products to be exploited. How many more victims were out there that they hadn't found yet? The FBI's plan was risky but potentially brilliant. Emily Park, Marcus's most recent target in Seattle, had only been dating him for 6 weeks when he'd made the mistake at the bank. Unlike Sarah and the other victims, Emily still believed in the relationship. She had no idea her boyfriend Ryan Mitchell was actually Marcus Cole, wanted by the FBI for fraud across multiple states. She thinks he's just had some financial troubles, Agent Chen explained. He told her the bank incident was a misunderstanding, that his accounts were frozen due to an IRS audit. She believes him because that's what he does. He's master manipulator with years of practice. The plan, Emily would continue the relationship under FBI supervision, wearing a wire, documenting everything while federal agents built an airtight case. When Marcus made his move to access her finances, they'd arrest him for wire fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other charges that would put him away for decades. But they needed Sarah's help to anticipate his patterns, to predict when he'd escalate, to know what tactics he'd use. "I'll do whatever you need," Sarah said without hesitation. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah worked closely with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, reconstructing her entire relationship with Marcus moment by moment. She created timelines, identified manipulation tactics, explained how he isolated her from friends, how he rushed intimacy, how he positioned the joint bank account as an expression of trust and partnership. "He mirrored everything about me," Sarah explained during one session, staring at her own notes spread across the conference table. "My interests, my speech patterns, my values. I mentioned wanting to volunteer at a children's hospital in Honduras someday, and 2 days later, he casually mentioned he'd always wanted to do international medical mission work. I said I love jazz music, and suddenly he's taking me to jazz clubs and talking about Miles Davis. Every single thing I said. He became the perfect complement to." The FBI psychologist, Dr. Raymond Torres, nodded thoughtfully. "That's called mirroring. It's a sophisticated psychological manipulation tactic. It creates an artificial sense of compatibility and deep connection. Combined with love bombing, rapid escalation, and strategic isolation, it's incredibly effective at breaking down normal defensive mechanisms." They monitored Emily's relationship in real time. She'd been instructed to make excuses about why she couldn't combine finances, yet she was waiting for a work bonus. She wanted to pay off her car first. She needed to talk to her accountant about tax implications. Each excuse bought more time for the FBI to build their case. Meanwhile, Marcus, calling himself Ryan Mitchell with Emily, continued his performance. The FBI had tapped Emily's phone and recorded every conversation. Sarah listened to some of the recordings and felt physically ill. It was like listening to a ghost. Hearing Marcus use the exact same words, the same tone, the same manufactured vulnerability that he'd used with her. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Marcus's voice said through the speakers, warm and earnest and completely false. "You're everything I've been searching for my entire life." The exact words he'd said to Sarah. Probably the exact words he'd said to all 23. Confirmed victims, and God knows how many others they hadn't identified yet. Was Emily safe, or was the FBI putting her in danger by using her as bait? The break came from an unexpected source: Marcus's own arrogance. In a storage unit buried under fake IDs and stolen documents, investigators found a USB drive labeled insurance. When the FBI's computer forensics team cracked the encryption, they discovered something incredible. Marcus had been keeping video recordings. None of his crimes that would have been too obvious, but video journals, recordings of himself talking directly to the camera, explaining his methods, bragging about his conquest, showing off the money he'd stolen. It was narcissism captured in digital form, and it was going to be his downfall. "You have to understand the psychology of Marx," Marcus said in one video, sprawled on a hotel bed somewhere, drinking expensive scotch. The footage was dated 2 years earlier. They want to believe in fairy tale romance. They want to believe they found their soulmate. So you give them what they want, you become their fantasy. Mirror them, validate them, make them feel special. Once they're hooked emotionally, the financial access is easy. They'll give you anything because they think you're building a future together. He laughed, actually laughed, swirling his scotch. The key is moving fast. You don't give them time to think critically. You overwhelm them with attention, affection, future plans. By the time any doubts creep in, they're already financially enmeshed. And here's the beautiful part, even when they suspect something's wrong, they don't want to believe it. Cognitive dissonance works in your favor. They'll rationalize away red flags because admitting they've been conned means admitting they're stupid, and nobody wants to feel stupid. Sarah watched this video in the FBI conference room, surrounded by agents and other victims who'd flown in to help with the case. The rage that filled her was white-hot and purifying. This monster had destroyed her life and treated it like a game, like she was nothing more than an obstacle to overcome in a video game. There's more, Agent Williams said, fast-forwarding to another section. This is from 6 months ago. Marcus's face filled the screen again, but this time he looked frustrated, even angry. Seattle's taking longer than expected. The Mark Emily, she's more financially cautious than my usual targets. I've had to slow play this one, build more trust. It's cutting into my timeline. I might need to move on soon, find an easier target. But the preliminary research shows she's worth at least $200,000, so I'm giving it another month. He consulted notes off camera. Chicago was my best score, the nurse, Sarah something. She was almost too easy. Trusting, desperate for love, isolated from family, decent savings, and she actually felt guilty when I implied she didn't trust me enough. Textbook Mark, I cleared. $800K from her directly, plus another $50,000 from the credit cards before I had to cut loose. Not bad for 4 months of work. The room went silent. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of rage. She'd been worth $130,000 to him. 4 months of her life, her trust, her love, her future reduced to a profit margin in his sociopathic accounting. Rachel Chun, sitting next to Sarah, grabbed her hand and squeezed. Around the table, other victims had similar expressions, horror mixing with fury, pain transmuting into determination. This video is going to bury him, Agent Chun said with grim satisfaction. Combined with the financial records, the fake IDs, the surveillance photos, and Emily's cooperation, we have enough evidence to put Marcus Cole away for 25 years minimum. Federal wire fraud, identity theft across state lines, money laundering, the charges are piling up. Agent Williams pulled out a map marked with pins. We've been tracking these patterns. He moves in a circuit West Coast, Southwest, Midwest, Southeast, back to West Coast. He never stays in one city longer than 6 months. He usually has 2 or 3 operations running simultaneously in different cities. Right now, based on his pattern and the fact that Seattle's taking too long, we believe he's about to cut his losses with Emily and move to his next target. Where would Marcus strike next, and would they catch him before he destroyed another life? The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a cold February morning. Sarah was in her new apartment, a tiny studio in a less expensive neighborhood, but it was hers, clean and safe. Paid for by the part-time administrative job she'd taken at a community health clinic while she continued therapy. Her phone buzzed with Detective Rodriguez's number, and Sarah's heart immediately kicked into overdrive. "We got him," Rodriguez said, her voice thick with triumph and exhaustion. Marcus Cole was arrested 43 minutes ago in Austin, Texas. He's in FBI custody. "It's over, Sarah. He can't hurt anyone else." Sarah sat down heavily on her secondhand couch, a phone pressed against her ear, unable to speak. For months, she'd imagined this moment, the relief, the vindication, the sense that justice was finally being served. But what she actually felt was more complicated. Relief, yes, but also a bone-deep exhaustion and something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the realization that even with Marcus in custody, the damage he'd done was permanent, unfixable, a scar she'd carry forever. What happened? Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. Rodriguez explained that Marcus had taken the bait. After weeks of Emily stalling on combining finances, he'd grown impatient and sloppy. He'd attempted to open a credit card in Emily's name using information he'd stolen from her apartment, but the FBI had flagged her accounts with every financial institution in the country. The moment the application pinged the system, agents triangulated his location, a hotel in Austin where he'd supposedly gone for a business trip, though they now knew he was already setting up his next target. A divorced real estate agent named Michelle Turner, who had no idea the man she met at a coffee shop 2 weeks earlier was a serial predator. FBI agents had surrounded the hotel at dawn. Marcus had tried to run, actually climbed out a third-floor window onto a fire escape, but there was nowhere to go. They'd found him with 3 fake IDs, $47,000 in cash, 2 laptops, and a burner phone containing text messages to Michelle Turner, already laying the groundwork for his next con. He lawyered up immediately, Rodriguez continued. But Sarah, the evidence is overwhelming. The videos he recorded, the financial records, testimony from 23 confirmed victims, forensic analysis of his devices. He's going to prison for a very long time. That afternoon, Sarah received another call, this one from Agent Williams, who asked if Sarah and the other victims would be willing to provide victim impact statements for the trial. It would help the prosecution demonstrate the full scope of his crimes, Williams explained. But I want to be clear, this is entirely voluntary. If facing him in court would be too traumatic, we have enough evidence to convict him without your testimony. Sarah thought about all the women whose photos she'd seen in Marcus's storage unit. All the lives he'd methodically destroyed while recording himself bragging about it. She thought about Emily Park, who'd been saved because Sarah and the others had been brave enough to help the FBI. She thought about Michelle Turner, who didn't even know yet how close she'd come to disaster. I'll testify, Sarah said, her voice steady. I want him to see what he did. I want him to hear what he took from me. And I want every other potential victim to know who he really is. Would facing Marcus in court finally give Sarah the closure she needed? 5 months later, Sarah stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, her hands trembling despite the warm June sunshine. Jennifer stood beside her, a steady presence, holding Sarah's hand. Around them, other victims had gathered: Rachel, Angela, Melissa, Yolanda, Margaret, and 14 others who'd flown in from across the country. They'd formed a support network over the past months, a sisterhood born from shared trauma, and now they stood together, ready to face the man who destroyed their lives. The courtroom was packed: journalists, prosecutors, FBI agents, family members, and in the front row on the defense side, Marcus Cole's elderly mother, a frail woman who looked shattered by the revelation of what her son had become. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for her, another victim in her own way. Then Marcus was let in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his hair shorter than Sarah remembered. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom, and Sarah felt her breath catch. He looked so ordinary, just a man, not the monster who haunted her nightmares. But then he smiled, a small, knowing smile that made her blood run cold, and she remembered this was a predator who'd made a career out of exploiting human vulnerability. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, financial records showing Marcus's systematic theft, surveillance footage from multiple cities, the damning videos he'd recorded himself, testimony from forensic accountants about the sophisticated money laundering schemes he'd employed. Expert witnesses explained the psychology of romance scams, how victims weren't stupid or weak, but targeted by professionals who exploited normal human desires for connection and trust. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that his client had gambling problems, addiction issues, that he'd made terrible mistakes that didn't deserve decades in prison. The argument fell flat when prosecutors played the videos of Marcus bragging about his marks, laughing about how easy they were to manipulate, treating their devastation as entertainment. On the 8th day of trial, it was time for victim impact statements. Sarah was third to speak. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, avoiding looking at Marcus, focusing instead on the judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd shown clear disgust throughout the trial. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," Sarah began, her voice soft but growing stronger with each word. "I'm a pediatric nurse. I've dedicated my career to caring for vulnerable children, to healing and helping, making the world a little better. That's who I was before I met the defendant. I want you to understand that because he tried to take that away from me." She took a deep breath, finally forcing herself to look at Marcus. He was staring at the table in front of him, refusing to meet her eyes. "Marcus Cole studied me for weeks before we accidentally met. He learned my vulnerabilities, my hopes, my dreams. He created a persona specifically designed to exploit my desire for partnership and family. And then, systematically, over 4 months, he destroyed everything I built." Sarah's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "He didn't just steal $130,000 from me. He stole my ability to trust. He stole my sense of safety in the world. He stole years of my life that I'll spend recovering from what he did. He stole my career temporarily. I couldn't work for months because of the depression and PTSD he caused. He almost stole my life entirely because there were dark days when I didn't think I could survive the shame and the financial devastation." Tears streamed down her face now, but her voice remained steady. "But here's what he didn't steal, what he couldn't steal. My resilience, my determination, my fundamental belief that most people in the world are good. I survived him. We all survived him." She gestured to the other victims in the courtroom. "And we're here to make sure he can never do this to anyone else." Would Marcus feel any remorse, or was he incapable of recognizing his victim's humanity? The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all 37 counts: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, theft by deception, mail fraud, bank fraud. Each verdict was read aloud, and with each guilty, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her chest, like breathing freely for the first time in a year. Judge Morrison sentenced Marcus to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. She also ordered restitution to all identified victims. Though the prosecutors acknowledged that most of the stolen money was gone, spent on Marcus's lavish lifestyle or hidden in offshore accounts, they couldn't trace. "Mr. Cole," Judge Morrison said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a defendant as callous and calculating as you. You treated human beings as resources to exploit. You caused immeasurable harm to dozens of women whose only crime was being open to love. You are a predator, and this court is removing you from society to protect others from your depredations." Marcus finally looked up, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something flicker across his face. Was it remorse? Regret? But then it was gone, replaced by the blank mask she'd seen throughout the trial. As he was led away, he didn't look back at the courtroom full of women whose lives he'd devastated. 1 year later, Sarah stood in front of a community center in downtown Chicago, looking up at a banner that read, "Financial Fraud Awareness Workshop, presented by Sarah Mitchell and the Survivors Network." Inside, 40 people had gathered, mostly women, but also a few men all interested in learning how to protect themselves from romance scams and financial predators. Jennifer sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Rachel Chun had flown in from Seattle to co-present. Angela Morrison had helped design the workshop materials. What had started as a support group for Marcus, Cole's victims, had evolved into something larger, a nonprofit organization dedicated to financial fraud education, victim support, and advocacy for better laws to protect against romance scams. Sarah began her presentation with the words she'd practiced 100 times, but which still made her emotional. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a survivor of financial intimate partner violence. A year and a half ago, I met a man who I thought was my soulmate. 6 months later, he'd stolen $130,000 from me and left me with PTSD, depression, and a destroyed credit history. Today, I'm here to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to you. She told her story not with shame anymore, but with the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged on the other side. She explained the warning signs: too fast relationship progression, isolation from friends and family, requests for financial information early on, inconsistencies in stories, reluctance to introduce you to their real life. She taught practical skills: how to verify someone's identity, how to protect your financial information, how to recognize manipulation tactics, how to trust your gut when something feels wrong. After the workshop, a young woman approached Sarah nervously. "I think I might be in a situation like this," she whispered. "My boyfriend moved in 3 weeks after we met, and he's been asking about my savings account. I thought I was being paranoid, but after your presentation..." Sarah took her hands gently. "You're not paranoid. Trust your instincts. Let's talk." That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, a better place now in a safer neighborhood. Affordable because she'd rebuilt her credit slowly and painfully over 18 months. She had a new job at the hospital, back in pediatrics, where she belonged. Her student loans from the fraudulent accounts had been discharged after lengthy legal battles. Her credit score had climbed from 420 back to 650 and was still rising. She had $3,000 in her savings account, not much, but it was honest money, earned through her own work, and it felt like a fortune. On her refrigerator was a photo from the support group, all the survivors together, smiling, arms around each other. They'd reclaimed something that Marcus thought he'd stolen: their power, their voices, their right to exist without shame. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Proud of you. Coffee tomorrow?" "Always," Sarah replied, smiling. She opened her laptop and began writing her blog post for the Survivors Network website. The title, "1 Year Later, How I Rebuilt My Life After Financial Fraud." She wrote, "People ask me if I've forgiven him. The answer is no, and I probably never will. But I've forgiven myself. I've stopped asking, how could I have been so stupid? And started asking, how could he have been so cruel? I've learned that trust isn't weakness, it's courage. Love isn't naive, it's human. And surviving isn't just about still being here, it's about reclaiming your life, piece by piece, until you recognize yourself again." She paused, looking at her reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back was different from the one who'd met Marcus at that charity fundraiser 2 years ago. This woman had scars, yes, but also strength. This woman knew what she was capable of surviving. This woman had turned her pain into purpose. Marcus Cole is in prison where he belongs. But I'm free. Free from his lies, free from shame, free to build a life on my own terms. He tried to destroy me, but he failed. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And I'm helping others do the same. That's victory. That's justice. That's reclamation. Sarah hit publish, closed her laptop, and looked around her small apartment, the plants thriving on the windowsill, the secondhand furniture she'd carefully chosen. The wall she painted herself in soft sage green because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden and of hope. She'd lost so much. But she'd also found something she didn't know she had. An unbreakable core of resilience. A community of survivors who understood. And the knowledge that she could survive anything. Sarah had survived the worst betrayal imaginable. What could life possibly throw at her now that she couldn't overcome? 3 years after Marcus Cole's conviction, Sarah stood in a television studio in New York City, waiting to be interviewed on a national morning show about her book, The Ghost I Loved, A Survivor's Guide to Financial Intimate Partner Violence. The book had become a surprise bestseller, resonating with thousands of people who'd experienced similar scams or feared becoming victims. She'd used her portion of the advance to pay off the last of her fraudulent debts. The rest had gone to funding the Survivors Network, which now operated in 15 cities across the country. Her phone buzzed with messages. Rachel congratulating her on the interview, Angela sending encouraging emojis, Jennifer texting a photo of herself holding the book in a bookstore window display. The sisterhood they'd forged in trauma had become one of the most important relationships in Sarah's life. The makeup artist touched up Sarah's face while the producer explained the interview format. We'll ask about your experience, the trial, how you rebuilt your life. The viewers love redemption stories. But Sarah had learned something important through her advocacy work. This wasn't a redemption story because she'd never needed redemption. She hadn't done anything wrong. This was a survival story, a transformation story, a story about refusing to let a predator define the rest of her life. Marcus Cole remained in federal prison in Pennsylvania, serving his 25-year sentence. Sarah occasionally received letters from other inmates he'd tried to con, telling her he was still running scams even behind bars, manipulating other prisoners, creating schemes, never changing. She wasn't surprised. Some people were damaged beyond repair, but Sarah had also learned she wasn't one of them. The damage Marcus had done was real and permanent. She still had moments of mistrust, still struggled with anxiety when starting new relationships, still carried the financial scars of his theft. But damage wasn't destruction. Wounded wasn't broken. Scarred wasn't defeated. Last month, Sarah had gone on her first date since Marcus a careful, slow coffee meeting with a kind emergency room doctor named James, who worked at her hospital. When he'd asked for her number, she'd almost said no, the old fear rising up. But then she'd remembered the woman she'd become strong enough to survive Marcus Cole, brave enough to tell her story publicly, compassionate enough to help other survivors heal. "I'd like that," she'd told James, typing her number into his phone. "But I should tell you I have some baggage. I'm a fraud survivor. I move slowly. I ask a lot of questions. And I trust carefully." James had smiled warmly. "I'd be worried if you didn't. Anyone who survived what you have and still has the courage to try again, that's not baggage. That's strength. Live in 5, the producer called out. Snapping Sarah back to the present. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking about all the women watching who might be in situations like hers, who might recognize themselves in her story, who might find the courage to leave, to report, to survive. She thought about Emily Park and Michelle Turner, the women who'd been saved because other victims had been brave enough to speak up. She thought about the countless future victims who might be protected. Because she was willing to share her pain publicly, the interview began. And Sarah told her story one more time, not with shame, but with the quiet dignity of a survivor who'd refused to be defined by what someone else had done to her. "What would you say to Marcus Cole if you could speak to him now?" the host asked near the end of the interview. Sarah paused, considering. For years, she'd imagined this moment, what she'd say to the man who tried to destroy her. But now, sitting in that studio with cameras rolling and thousands of people watching, she realized something important. I wouldn't say anything to him. He doesn't deserve my words, my energy, or my thoughts. This story isn't about him anymore. It's about survival, resilience, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. It's about the community of survivors who've turned their pain into purpose. It's about prevention and education and making sure this happens to fewer people in the future. She looked directly into the camera, speaking to all the survivors watching. If you're going through something like this right now, you're not alone. You're not stupid, and it's not your fault. And I promise you, on the other side of this darkness is a life worth living. I'm proof. The interview ended to enthusiastic applause. As Sarah left the studio, her phone exploded with messages, hundreds of them, from survivors across the country thanking her for speaking up, for giving voice to their experiences, for showing them that survival was possible. Sarah Mitchell walked out into the bright New York City morning, past the crowds and the traffic and the endless possibility of the future. She'd been broken by a man who saw her as nothing more than a profit margin in his twisted game. But she'd rebuilt herself into something stronger, more compassionate, more purposeful than she'd ever been before. The bank had called 2 years ago and shattered her illusions. But in the broken pieces, she'd found something Marcus Cole would never understand. True strength isn't never falling down. It's getting back up, again and again, until you finally recognize the warrior you've always been.